Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. Gavan Casey here as always. This podcast is brought to you in association with William Hill. Remember to gamble responsibly and visit donalui.net on more information. Murray Kinsella, my colleague, joins me as always. Murray, how's your week going? How are you keeping?
Not too bad. I was off on Monday, so the week's been kind of weird. I feel like I'm chasing my tail and will be until everything kicks off again with Six Nations on Saturday. But loads to look forward to this weekend. Loads of rugby happening at the moment, all around the world really. So I'm enjoying watching as much of it as I possibly can.
Brilliant. Bernard Jackman, you're here too, and delighted to have you on as always. How is your week going? How are you keeping?
Yeah, really good. Really good. Again, like Murray, I'm not as into the Japanese championship as he seems to be, but I'm enjoying the little clips he's shown. Some great skill, and yeah, Super Rugby being back is great. And yeah, I was lucky enough. I was in Belfast on Saturday night for Ulster Leinster, so and I'm doing Leinster Zebra this weekend. So yeah, I'm actually getting to I'm not going to Italy obviously, but Zebra Leinster, but I'll be in studio. But yeah, it was nice to get in the car and just drive last weekend to Belfast for the game.
With the benefit of a few days to mull over that game, Bernard, that you did last weekend, what do you make now of Andrew Warwick's red card? And he's gotten a 2-game suspension, 2 meaningful game suspension in the interim just before we started recording. Jimmy O'Brien's yellow card as well. Can I ask you about that and sort of your interpretation of both of them and the fact that O'Brien thus far hasn't been cited as a result of that hit on Ian Madigan?
Yeah, I thought, to be honest, look, I could see why Warwick's is a red. I can see how it could be given as a red if you're going to, really be vigilant and strict on the laws. I think Jimmy's is probably a red, given what I'm seeing in other leagues. It's not, there's no intention there, but it doesn't matter if you have a head clash. I mean, I thought the mitigation was really interesting. The fact that Madigan was jumping was used as mitigation. Which if you're jumping, you should be higher. So how high would you hit him if he hadn't been? But anyway, look, they haven't cited him. Unfortunately, it's difficult for Frank Murphy at the moment. I think he's struggling a little bit. He's in a bit of a dip, which referees and players and coaches all have. So hopefully he bounces back. And it was a tough game for him the way it unfolded. And I think Leinster were incredible. I mean, Ulster obviously had a phenomenal start, but even without a red card, I think Leinster would have won. They're just so clinical, no matter who plays. They just dug in, turned the corner, and were really impressive. And their play 5 yards out it's phenomenal. It's actually, to be honest, it's actually boring as a spectacle. And I think, people are talking around, time it takes to get scrums set. At least you can have a really good scrum contest. The way it's gone at the moment, if you get 5 yards out, you're pretty much nearly guaranteed to score as long as you stay patient. Because if you look at teams like Leinster, they just basically pick and go until they get a penalty advantage. And then I think what they're doing is really, really shrewd, actually. They don't go to wit unless they can actually just score, like 100% score. They just keep picking and going on a penalty advantage. And what that does is it just really fatigues the defence. Whereas Ulster during that game, they had times when they were on the Leinster line, they had a penalty advantage, and they went out to the edges and didn't score. And then obviously the referee calls it back for the penalty. And I think that just gives the defence a chance to get set again, and you have to restart all over again. So it'll be interesting if teams, copy Leinster. And in fairness, Leinster can do it better than everybody else because of the power and the fitness levels, which seem to be at a level above everyone else, to be honest. Even their backup players can come in and seem to play at a higher level. And I think, to be honest, the reason for that is the quality of training. So effectively they're getting harder training sessions than games. And the team we saw play the other night on Saturday, I mean, they're used to training against the Irish team, effectively in Donnybrook. And so they're going to get better through that. Whereas, I'm not saying Ulster and Munster don't have strong squads, but certainly when you go into the other teams in the Pro 14 at the moment, they wouldn't have anything like the depth that the Irish provinces have. So hence the Irish provinces, the four of them are at the top of both conferences, and it's a little bit one-sided.
Murray, I don't want to keep going back to those decisions. They're well worn at this point, but because we haven't heard from you yet this week, you mentioned you were off on Monday. What did you make of Warwick's red, O'Brien's non-sending off, and then I'll ask you as well about your thoughts on what Bernard was saying about Leinster there.
Yeah, I thought you and Owen had a really good chat about it on the members pod on Monday. There's so many cards. Yeah, go through them. I thought Devin Toners was a yellow. I know it was a really unfortunate circumstance that the tallest guy on the pitch tackles the smallest guy on the pitch, and there's massive height differential, but his arm swings into his face, and we know that that's not acceptable in the game now. I thought that was fair enough. I did agree that Jimmy O'Brien's was a red card. For me, it was exactly like all the reds we've seen in those instances, and Bernard mentioned the jump there. That's not really a mitigating circumstance in my mind. I thought there was a bit of force in it. Again, I don't think the intent from Jimmy O'Brien was to headbutt him in any way, but they came together in that manner, and we've seen other people punished with a red for that. The actual red card itself, again, I can understand that's what referees have been told to get out of the game. Any neck or head contact with a leading elbow away from the body. And as Owen described on Monday, it is a technical red card, but the onus now is on the players to absolutely nail their technique, and it's tough on them, certainly. But with an instance like that, you've got to be nailed on technically, that your arm is really flush against your body and it's braced there rather than out in front. And again, I know how tough that is in split second when you're trying to be aggressive with your carry, but I felt that was the right decision, really. So yeah, for me, the O'Brien one was probably the big one that was a miss there. The other yellow cards for the penalty infringements, I can totally understand. Again, McCloskey near the try line, I do have sympathy for him, because it did look like blocking just before that, where Max O'Reilly goes through and Marcel Coetzee is denied access to a tackle by Scott Penny, I think it is. So he's really frustrated with that. But beyond that, his offence near the try line was worthy of a yellow, as were the other ones for, I suppose, the repeated infringements. We've seen those. It was an incredible circumstance with the number of yellows and those incidents. But I suppose the big one that stood out for me was the O'Brien one. And I'm surprised that we didn't hear or haven't heard more about that even since the game.
What about the Ballycloone try? Or non-try?
Yeah, I actually felt that was a tough call. I can see what he was thinking in terms of, yeah, there's contact between the players there. But for me, the decision is made by Ruddock, and I think he can actually get out and make that tackle. Listen, yes, there's contact there, and it's ahead of the ball. McCluskey has run ahead of Ballycloone, but I think he can do more. I think he makes a decision to bite down on the line. I think it's well timed from Ulster in that regard. And yeah, for me, it was a tough call. I think you agreed. I agree.
I think that wasn't actually Ballycloone took the ball so far behind the decoy as well. There was time absolutely to adjust. So I think where Reece got caught, I think he can easily push off there. Not easily, but he can push off. And I think, I think the referee can give the tack the benefit of the doubt in that situation. But just going back to my talk around my point around the 5 yard out stuff, I think the referees are only refereeing the defensive side there. I mean, it's next to impossible to go 25 phases without sealing off or going off your feet on the clean out, or the ball carrier not releasing instantly. And at the moment, there's a trend, and this isn't just the Pro 14 or whatever. You watch Exeter, executing it really well. Lots of teams are very good at it, but I think that if teams had the same clean out technique further out the field, they'd get pinged quicker. But it's like once a team enter that area, the referees are really conscious of having an easy out for the defensive side. So that's something that maybe they need to look at, because I don't think it's really like, you don't want, I don't mind pick and goes at all. And obviously it's a really good opportunity for teams to show, good patience, technique, power, etc. But if there's an opportunity to throw two passes and score, obviously you'd like him to be able to go there as well, and mix it up and not have 4 or 5 minutes camped on the line, 4 or 5 times a game. Whereas I think at the moment, because players know that if they're just patient, the referee will give a penalty against the defending team, and then they have a penalty advantage, and then they have a choice. That if the referees started to pick up a little bit on that on the offensive side, I think it'd be good for the game. It'd be more risk taking.
Yeah, the latch work is it's gone to a new level, obviously, in terms of its effectiveness. But I think there's more being missed than ever. And this even applies to the Six Nations. I think of Wales' try against Scotland. If people go have a look at that one, the Wyn Jones one, where you've got guys like clearly ahead of the ball, coming from a couple of meters outside and latching in front of them. You saw Scotland complaining about it at one stage. And now, even with the 5 metre tap penalties, guys are latching on straight away as soon as the hooker taps the ball, and it has to be officially a hooker to tap that ball. I can't wait to see someone else. Maybe Sam Simmons is the other one who's good at it. But it is happening an awful lot, and something that probably needs a little bit more attention. Just on the game itself, it is a shame the red came at the time it did, because obviously that Balakoon try was exceptional from Ulster and showed what they've been doing in the last couple of weeks with some of their offloading, with players making really good decisions, and a nice finish from him. Balakoon looks really sharp since his return. I'm excited about his potential. He's 23 now, but a serious athlete, really good learner, really diligent, and makes excellent decisions in defence. Generally, he's good in the air as well. And I just think he has so much more potential. I'd love to see Balakoon back in the Ireland mix at some stage, because I think he can keep improving. And that score showed what Ulster are all about. Really lovely team try. And just a pity that we probably didn't get to see more of that contest after the red card. But yeah, an interesting couple of weeks now for Ulster. Leinster kind of are building up for that final. Ulster have a few dead rubbers before their European tie, which is a pity. And I know Dan McFarlane's frustrated about that. And he'd be obviously frustrated about the circumstances of this game last weekend.
Just to ask you, Murray, about what Bernard was saying there about Leinster's kind of ground and pound approach from the 5, particularly when they have an advantage. Is there a danger of kind of using that to your detriment eventually, in that the more you do of that and the less you go wide, probably the harder you'll find it to go wide, just purely through muscle memory and how often you're doing it. And maybe that if there are teams that can't stand up to them up front, there are probably only 3 or 4 in Europe, but I'm talking about in the latter stages of European competition. If somebody can repel them on the line, like they may be out of practice almost in being more clinical in going wide, popping those 2 passes and taking a try, or am I kind of overcomplicating it a bit? Is it a basic enough skill to go wide, even if this is the approach for now, to keep it narrow and bash it up the middle?
Yeah, if there's an opportunity wide, I think Leinster definitely have the skill set and the decision-making ability, I think, to go there and take it. We know they can strike from deep. And listen, their game is very much, against most opponents, as you say, based on overpowering, fatiguing them. And that's a good strategy when it's successful, when you can do that against teams you're physically more dominant than, and who you can outlive in terms of those long passages. But I think Leinster have shown an ability to be a bit more varied in their approach. That's their strength, I think, is that they can play a number of different ways. And they score some outstanding tries in most games, really. Or the build-up play to get into that position on the 5 metre line is a brilliant set-piece play that draws a penalty, or a nice tip-on pass. The interplay between the forwards is good at times. And I think they're a varied force. I think with the most recent Saracens one, it was probably just the scrum was a disaster that day. And that was the deciding of the match, if we're being realistic about it. Against the very best teams, you're probably not going to get the chances to throw the ball with a couple more passes to get to width. Certainly against a team like Saracens, with their defensive strength, it's not a case of not being able to do it with your own skill set. It's often a case of you just don't get those opportunities. So, I can see your point. Absolutely, you want to be well practiced in that more wide approach or a higher passing rate and getting chains of passes across the back line. I do think Leinster probably work on those skills, and someone like Stuart Lancaster will always be pressing home to them that there's an opportunity and a decision-making responsibility for the players to identify those chances.
Yeah, Birch, not to labour the point, and maybe I didn't even word it as best as I could have, but with Lancaster, somebody like that, there probably is no danger really of what I'm asking. But if it is a kind of a stylistic thing, or it is a mindset, maybe then it's not even the case that you lose the skills to be able to throw the couple of passes out wide, but maybe that you don't see that opportunity. And we might have seen that with Ireland a little bit in recent years as well. Like just the idea that you can be kind of married of a way of breaking the breaching the line, if you like, and that maybe the sort of more peripheral stuff gets a little bit lost or a little bit more muddied in the mind?
Well, look, it's definitely a worry for Leinster that they haven't been able to transfer the dominance they have in the domestic competition to the Champions Cup, and obviously the draw's out now. But I think they do look and try and make sure they're ahead of the curve, and I think they are. Even in this tactic, they're ahead of the curve, really, because they are belligerent in that area, and they're so smart that they get more of those opportunities than other teams. But I think Stuart Lancaster and Neil Cullen and Felipe Contaponi will certainly be looking at, maybe not, well, they'll be looking at Toulon, obviously, but that they're not probably the test that they need. It's probably Exeter is where any little creaks or any areas where you've been probably over-reliant or, just used sheer power, because that's where you have it. That's where you have an advantage in the domestic league when you come up against the likes of Toulouse, Exeter, Racing Metro. For me, they're the three top teams. Plus Leinster, they're the top four teams in Europe this year. That's maybe when you need to have other strings to your bow. But I do think, I agree with Murray. I think it's very hard to judge them on the Saracens game because we didn't get to see any of the other stuff that they do well, just because there was one area of weakness that became their Achilles heel in that game. But I think, I think they've got a great coaching staff. They've got a brilliant group, and I'm fascinated to see how they develop how they go in Europe this year, plus the Rainbow Cup, if that happens, because they won't outpower the Bulls, so again, I think that'll be really good for their evolution in terms of trying to find ways of beating different type of opposition, because let's be honest, they're completely dominant. I mean, if it was a golf, they'd have to have a handicap in the domestic league. That's the only way of no, but seriously, like, we never talk about that, and that's the reality of how dominant they are in that competition at the moment. To go whatever it is, 3 seasons, I don't know how many games they've lost. With the rotation they do, it's phenomenal. And there's one guy, and I texted Murray about it yesterday. Michael Bent is absolutely crucial to Leinster in the Pro 14. You're losing Porter and Tyke Furlong to international rugby, and they're gone a lot. And Michael Bent, I know he's probably not going to be there next year, but just his ability to win scrum penalties is a huge part of how they play, because they are very rigid in how they move up the field. And he was missing for a couple of weeks, and they conceded 3 tries against Glasgow. They conceded a lot of points away to Dragons, and that's understandable. They have young props trying to find their way, but Bent is probably one of the most improved players in Ireland, and I know he gets a raw deal because of the circumstances in which he got capped and stuff, or not, doesn't get a raw deal, but gets, doesn't probably get the credit he deserves. But I think he's been an unbelievable stalwart for Leinster, and he'll be missed.
Just briefly back to your point, though, Gav, you're right in what you're getting at, in that that's a challenge. They're dominant in every match. It's about making sure that you're not complacent enough to think that that's going to work. Say it is that Exeter game, which it looks like being. Toulon are a good side, obviously, but Leinster would really fancy themselves to win at home. And that's a massive game against Exeter, where every single decision you make is magnified. If you think about the previous Saracens game in the final in Newcastle, and where Gary Ringrose doesn't pass the ball when they have that overlap on the right-hand side just after half-time, and not to pick on him, but it is a massively crucial part of the game, and that non-decision, I suppose. And yeah, there have been a number of instances that from Ireland, even in the France game, and you think of Ringrose even putting his hand up afterwards and saying, I needed to make better decisions there. So maybe in the most intense pressure, there is a little bit of a theme there about Irish players not kind of nailing those decisions. And that's definitely one for them to be cognizant of, and to keep identifying those opportunities, and to keep giving players the autonomy and a bit of responsibility to make them.
I knew you could word it better than me, Murray. That was what I was trying to get at. We got there in the end. There's a question here from Emmett, and it's in relation to the Rainbow Cup, actually, that you mentioned a while ago, Bernard. He says, let me see now, how should the provinces approach the Rainbow Cup? Should they go at it fully and give the international lads a chance to get into Lions / Summer Tour squads, or should they rotate and give fringe guys minutes to develop? I'll throw that one to yourself, Birch.
Yeah, look, I think it'd be really important that some of our internationals play. They're going into a really busy period now where they go Scotland, England, Pro 14 final for certainly the Munster players. We'll see what Leinster do, and then into Europe. And so it's a block. But they also had a rest week last week. They didn't play around 3 and 4 of Europe. So I think there's plenty of scope left in terms of game management time for our internationals to play some of the Rainbow Cup for sure, but also, for the next crop, look at that Leinster team who played the other night. I mean, they're missing so many, but that's a quality team. Scott Fardy, Devin Toner, second row. You've Rhys Ruddock, Josh van der Fleer, who played Six Nations. Then you have Scott Penny, James Tracy. You've Ed Byrne, who's been in the Six Nations squad. So there's lots of quality there. So I think the teams, the squads we see week in, week out for the 4 provinces are more than good enough to go and play against the best South African teams, and still manage to give players rest when they need it, or if they have niggles, look after them. But I think it's important that this competition works for us, and not just for our provinces, for our international rugby. I think it's really important we have a competition that's more testing and can help us judge, the next best crop. Because let's be honest, the reason a lot of people are kicking up about Andy Farrell not picking players is because they're comparing it to the French, who have picked, like Jalibert, etc., with less experience. But unfortunately, here at the moment, it's really we judge players on whether they play European Cup or not. Whereas imagine we had, a better, more competitive domestic competition, which we will have with these 4 teams. It'll definitely add to it, plus a European Cup. But I think it gives, the likes of Harry Byrne, etc., more opportunities to prove whether they're international quality or not. So I'm excited by it, and I think it's really important that we treat it properly, and when possible, to play our frontline players.
One last question on the provinces. I'll throw it to yourself, Murray, just because we haven't touched upon the Munster Connacht game so much there. Now, bear in mind, people at home, if you're not a member of the 42, we do a Monday morning review podcast as well, Rugby Weekly Extra, members.the42.e if you want to join us there for that one. But is there anything you've seen in Munster, or you saw in Munster over the weekend, that would suggest that in this Pro 14 final against Leinster, things can be any different to the way they have been in the past 378 meetings between the province, or whatever it's been, where Leinster have been either way too good or just about good enough, as we saw more recently?
In that game, probably not. I mean, a lovely individual try from Mike Haley. A moment like that can absolutely swing one of the games against Leinster. You're probably not going to get that opportunity in a final against them, but if a player can produce something like that, absolutely. And in fairness to Mike Haley, he had a number of moments like that in the game and has been really excellent. Also, you look at Joey Carberry coming off the bench again. There's a bit of a difference from the most recent couple of games. And he got a little bit longer. Again, he looked comfortable. Physically, he looks really good. And Johan McGrath mentioned he's had this extended period. You can see his upper body. He's just stronger and hopefully a little bit more robust as well. And definitely he's going to get a start in the next couple of weeks, and I'll be shocked if he's not starting that Pro 14 final, and they have a crack off it in that way. Coupled with the fact that it's going to be the week after the Six Nations, and Leinster, I would imagine, will probably have a greater element of mixing and matching in their team after guys playing 2 back-to-back tests. And both coaches have said that might be the case, which is a bit crazy really for a decider. But in terms of how they played, not exactly. And I honestly don't foresee Munster trying to do a whole amount different from what they've done the last couple of occasions against Leinster. They feel they were really close, and that a couple of things, marginal things as they say, just didn't go quite their way. And they'll feel that if they can have a similar mix with just a little bit more quality, that they'll finally turn that around. And it feels like a good chance to do it, I guess, the week after Six Nations, the week before Europe. It's really strangely placed in that sense, and selection is going to be massive. But God, it's a really good opportunity for Munster to end the decade-long drought.
Just on that, can you imagine if Leinster don't play their internationals or put them on the bench, and Leinster beat Munster? It'd be a serious blow to Munster. I think it's a huge game for Munster, and it's going to be really fast. It's going to be fascinating to see how. Well, I know. I look at Munster going to go full strength. It'd be fascinating to see how Leinster go in terms of selection.
Munster fans will be frothing at the mouths at home at that suggestion, Birch. And like, to be fair, I was just going to say the reality is that the gap did seem to close a little bit, at least in that last game. They were close. Like, Munster are right to feel as though they were close, at least close to beating Leinster in a one-off game. And Murray mentions that little extra quality that Munster need probably to get them over that line. And that was the difference between the two teams in the end. Leinster's try was that little added sprinkling of quality that Munster couldn't produce on the day. But, you know, it's like a couple of, maybe a case of getting a couple of those things right. Like, where on the day it actually just a pass goes to hand, or something does happen where there's a little bit of space and a score settles it, you know.
Yeah.
That was it, wasn't it? Last time, I mean, they missed a couple of shots a goal, and
yeah.
Again, not to be harsh on someone, but it was that close, and then Leinster had that chance to find their moment, and they did it. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. We'll have another week's build up of Munster Leinster, so I can't wait.
I can't wait either, I have to say. Murray, chat to us about CVC. Obviously, was announced today, Thursday, as we record, £426 million. Is it pound or euro? You can correct me there. Investment in the Six Nations. It's worth about 56 million to the IRFU, 7 million initial windfall towards the end of this year, which, interestingly, like, to put it into context, Philip Brown said will kind of fund the IRFU, or is enough to fund the IRFU for just over a month. And that does put it into scope how perilous a financial situation the game finds itself in. I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are absolutely up to speed on everything in rugby, but for plenty of them as well, I know many of them, friends of mine, this might not be the kind of thing that they're scrolling through their 42 app and click into as a story. It might not interest them. So can you sort of summarize it from your point of view, the benefits of it, or how it's going to work, basically?
Yeah, so it's a private equity firm buying a share of Six Nations Rugby, a 1/7 share. So essentially, like, they're almost a new national union. The other Six Nations retain, obviously, the controlling stake, and they make all the rugby decisions, but they're getting CVC on board for their commercial expertise, i.e. to make them more money. They want to become more profitable, get more money from TV revenue and sponsorship. That's the bottom line. And CVC have a track record of doing that. People will maybe know them from Formula One. So in that sense, yeah, you mentioned the figures there. That's good for the RFU and all the other unions at a time when they need money. They're saying that this is going to help them, obviously, in this current challenging climate, and then further down the line in terms of investing into their game. And it's absolutely a positive if unions can make more money and they can invest more into growing the game in that sense. But I suppose people's concern over this has been that around a paywall, especially with the Six Nations and the other competitions which this deal encapsulates. It's not just the men's Six Nations, it's the women's Six Nations, the under-20 Six Nations, and all the autumn internationals as well. So that was kind of bundled into a package last year, and CVC are going to kind of drive the commercial sponsorship side of that. Listen, that'll be great for the women's game, hopefully, because there hasn't even been a sponsor for the Six Nations as things stand, and you would hope that investment will push that side of the game on. But I suppose people are mainly worried about a paywall with the Six Nations, which has obviously been free to air, and as long as people can remember, they can remember tuning into big Six Nations game, and that's their main touching point with rugby often. And that would be my main concern as well. It's inevitable. It's going to happen potentially even next year, 2022. The current TV deals are up after this championship, and the tender process is open again. There may be a kind of split of free-to-air games and games behind the paywall, but then you get in a tricky situation of deciding which ones are still free to air, and if it's a shite, meaningless fixture that's not involving a contender for the championship, what value is there in that on free to air? So I suppose the unions, who still are going to have the majority say in this, they've got to consider how potentially damaging it could be to lose some of the eyeballs, or potentially how gainful it is, I suppose, to get more money for it, and increase their revenues in that way. CVC only have a 1/7 say, but they'll only have to get 3 other unions on board, and then that's a majority for what they do. So there's going to be lots of politics involved in this as well. More money into the game is great, but I just would have caution and worry about maybe going behind paywall with Six Nations.
Yeah, you'd have to say it probably requires caution as well. Like, I've seen a lot of people make the point that because CVC have only 1/7 say, technically speaking, that it means that the other 6 unions, or the 6 actual unions, have a greater say in, as CVC have outlined themselves, in the competitive side of things, and that they won't necessarily interfere with the competition, but also that they will have a deciding say in commercial elements of this deal. And it's wishful thinking really on behalf of like rugby fans to imagine that CVC's influence will only really be 1/7 of this, because as you say, there'll be lobbying within this group and there'll be so much politics at play. It only takes a few phone calls and a little bit of dangling the carrot for minds to be swayed one way or the other. And I think we have to probably confront the reality, or potential or future reality rather, that the competition will be behind a paywall. I think we've touched upon this in detail in a previous podcast, so I don't think we need to go into it so much now. It will erode this competition's sense of cultural status, like in the sporting landscape in Ireland at least. I think it will be harmful for the growth of the game, but that's not the way individual unions view the sport, really. Again, it's kind of wishful thinking or naivety. At least this is what I think, that they want to see the game spread across the globe and all these sorts of things. Really, I'm sure they would like that, but first and foremost on their agenda is to be able to sustain themselves and to make as much money for their individual units as possible. And moving a Six Nations onto Amazon, or moving it to Sky Sports or BT, is a really decent solution in terms of short-term financial gains and probably long-term sustainability for those unions. So I think that's a reality. But that brings us then to a kind of a wider question, or a wider issue for the game, Birch. Not just the Six Nations, but rugby generally speaking. It's a mess for fans. For anybody listening to this podcast at home who wants to watch rugby, you need 4 or 5 subscriptions now if you want to watch like pretty much all the top level competitions. You still can't really watch the French top 14. We saw, say for example, Super Rugby AU moving to World Rugby's website. It's going to be streamed for free in a lot of territories in Europe, Asia, and including Ireland, obviously. Great news, because we get to watch Rob Kearney for the Western Force. But when I was looking for their kickoff time against the Rebels tomorrow, which is 9:45 a.m. Irish time, you know, the way usually with sporting competitions, including sort of, if you want to call them smaller ones, but I mean to be disrespectful, League of Ireland, for example, if I was to search for Cork City's fixtures, it comes up in a kind of like a Google box at the top of your search results. When I searched Western Force versus Rebels, it showed me the result of a game from 2017. Like, it just feels as though the game is lagging miles behind. Stakeholders, people involved in these competitions are miles behind in terms of actually exposing their competitions to people. And people can't afford to be shelling out for a lot of them, people can't afford to be shelling out for 6-7 different channels to be able to watch their own teams and also to watch the international game. So it feels like we're moving further away actually from growing the game from a TV standpoint, even if at the moment this might be the only solution, or it might be enough to top up the coffers short term.
Yeah, I actually thought, I just read this morning that they get 90 million from ITV and BBC for the current TV deal, and that's obviously up, which sounds like a lot of money. Having said that, the French are after signing a new deal just for the top 14 of, I think it's 113 million euro a year, so more than the Six Nations is worth. Obviously a lot more games, but look, at the ideal scenario would be we had one kind of central hub to get our rugby, and I don't see that happening. I'd imagine Sky Sports or Amazon will have some of the Six Nations next year, and it's going to add to it. But I think the problem is now COVID has really extenuated the need for cash. So whatever chance we had with the 6 countries saying, look, for the good of the game, we need to be on terrestrial TV. I think the COVID and the debts that's been accumulated and the cash reserves that are dwindling will mean that it's going to be a case of whoever pays the most will have the best rights, and yeah, it's not ideal at all. But let's just see how it unfolds, and hopefully we get some kind of compromise where some of it at least some of the Six Nations or international rugby stays free there.
You're right though, Gav, around like fans and the way they engage or are able to engage with the sport. It does still feel like it's young in terms of its professionalism and even simple stuff like that. In terms of the access, like you look at American sports, obviously, and the way they do those kind of things, it's next level. And certainly CVC will bring some of that expertise and they'll slap some of that stuff into shape and they'll bring a modern touch to it. But at the same time, professional, like rugby, as a sport, it's relatively small, and like this deal is to grow the game. But I think you grow the game by having more people be able to tune into it easily and sometimes for free to air for those biggest games, because otherwise you're just going to stay where we are right now, and that's where unions are probably worried about their financial situation from year to year, and we don't grow it beyond 5 or 6 countries who can potentially win a World Cup. That's going to get boring. Well, listen, I get excited about anything, but that's going to get boring within the next few World Cups if it's just the same old people over and over again and everyone's looking out for their own self-interest. I probably have the same fear as you that within each union there isn't that long-term selfless view of things. But even short-term, it would be brilliant for supporters. Like we did a newsletter about this yesterday for members, and I'm blown away by the number of emails we've got back from people. This is their major frustration and gripe with the game. A number of different issues, but CVC have also bought, we should mention, into the Pro 14 a 28% stake and into the Gallagher Premiership at a 27% stake. So they have this opportunity, I suppose, to start bundling things together and make it a little bit more straightforward. It's crazy that people can't watch the top 14, a league with some of the biggest stars, some of the best rugby, and the old stereotypes aren't completely true about it now. Like watching Toulouse is one of the greatest joys in rugby. Honestly, they're wonderful in the top 14. Even the top league now has so many star names playing, and we're probably still away from a more general interest in that. But it would be great if there was more access to it all. I think of the times we've been down in New Zealand, and you flick on Sky Sports New Zealand 1, I think it is now, and it's just rugby 24 hours a day, and they have stuff from all over the world. Now, obviously, the interest level there is very, very high in comparison to most places, but it shouldn't be that hard to do. It shouldn't be that hard to make it a little bit more easy for punters. And you're going to have to make decisions, of course. Every sport has multiple broadcasters, I think, but it is really frustrating for fans, and I totally get that at the moment.
Let's look ahead to brighter horizons, or potentially brighter times. Scotland, Ireland this weekend, and I'm buzzing for it, I have to say. I know, Murray, when you tweeted out the officials yesterday as they were announced, the reaction to your tweet from a lot of people was one of dismay. I think it just adds to the potential chaos of this game in a good way. I think it's going to be absolutely spectacular, and I can't wait for it. And I don't want to fixate on the officials this week. I'm sure they'll do their best, as they always do.
Yeah. Well, no matter, just to say on that, no matter who I've started doing it each match week, and these officials were appointed months ago, and we all just forget that they're in charge. And I started doing it on the match weeks now, and there's always someone who replies with the Father Ted gif. Oh, bollocks. No matter who the referee is, which is it always makes me laugh, but there's always a gripe there. And obviously, Poit more recently had that incredible non-decision around the Henderson try when he was TMOing. So hopefully Ireland can count on getting a try back.
It's cruel, isn't it, that nobody ever responds positively? Like nobody ever thinks, he's actually decent. Your mind immediately goes to a time when he's smited you in some way. I know who would be. That being said, probably a difficult enough game for them this weekend, Bernard. Is going to be hammer and tongs both sides. I think it's a fascinating game, I have to say. I think it's a potentially era-defining game, but only for within the context of these two countries. I'm not saying one of them is going to go and take over Europe after this, but it could so easily swing the dynamic between the two countries and how their fortunes against each other have been playing out over the last decade or more. And you've got a reality for Ireland in which if they don't perform, the pressure comes on Andy Farrell big time, and you're going into a game against England looking to avoid coming second last, basically, and being almost a joke. And you have a reality for Scotland wherein if they manage to beat Ireland and get over that hump and put behind what happened to them against Wales, they are suddenly a force, you'd imagine. And like that, for them, that would be an awful lot of psychological weight to rid themselves of, not only going into the rest of this tournament or the France game, say, but I'd say for the next 5-6 years, where they could actually look to start to really challenge for this tournament. Whereas if they were to lose to Ireland again, it might send them back to the doldrums for a couple of years. You just don't know. Like, it feels like a real hinge game upon which so much is riding.
Absolutely, it's the best weekend I think so far in the Six Nations, with obviously England playing France as well. But Scotland, yeah, I think this is, as you say, massive for Scotland. Fair play to the SRU. They backed Gregor Townsend after a poor World Cup. He has changed the way they play, and he's brought in a different support staff. He's made a move to shore up their defence, which was horrendously porous previously. Tandy looks like he's done a great job there, and he's a very good coach. He's got a scrum specialist in Peter de Villiers. They're more pragmatic in how they play, but yet they still have a nice attacking brand. Got a great start against England, and we all fancy them to beat Wales. Obviously, the red card maybe changed the course of that game. But having said that, Wales, before the red card, Wales were actually getting back into the game. So I don't know if it was a foregone conclusion that Scotland would have won. And I know Scotland played some great stuff with 14, but I'm not sure how good they are. I mean, England form has obviously been shown to be not as good as we thought it was, and so yeah, it's hard to know. I do think they're better than they were, but I fancy them coming to Dublin in November, and they just didn't show up. Ireland bullied them, and they looked miles away from Ireland. And I hope Ireland are still better than them. So I think that's what Ireland will try and do. They'll try and squeeze him. They'll try and pressurise Finn Russell and hope he comes up with a couple of errors. And they'll obviously try and target Ali Price as well. Hogg is playing great. Their wings are brilliant, but I think Ireland will try and starve them with the ball, and I don't think that'll suit Scotland at all. And I do think their front five are still a little bit behind ours. Even though they've got some exciting players, I think our front five can do a job on them. And I think we can win. If we don't win, obviously it's going to be terrible for our development, and the pressure for England will be massive. But likewise for Scotland, I think it'll just completely burst their balloon. And I think it'll be hard then for Townsend, because they've got to go to France, obviously, last game, for the rescheduled game. I think it'd be hard for him to rebuild again. So it's as you said, it's fascinating.
Murray, there has been a lot of revisionism really about that Wales game, but I think on behalf of the Scots, it may be just a case of them trying to make themselves feel better about what happened. I agree with Bernard completely in that Wales were growing into that game big time, and as we've seen of Wales throughout history, to be honest, or at least throughout modern history, they're really hard to beat. You have to properly put them away, and there's no guarantee Scotland would have done that 15-on-15. That being said, like the England game, I find so interesting from Scotland's point of view. Obviously, we've spoken about it at length as everybody over the last month or so. But when you even consider that autumn game to which Bernard alludes, where there was a kind of a collective sense that Scotland were going to come over a force to be reckoned with against Ireland, and even thinking back to that first game of Andy Farrell's reign, where if not for a Stuart Hogg drop, Scotland might well have beaten Ireland in Dublin. Scotland flattered to deceive in the autumn against Ireland. Ireland just sort of do what they usually do against Scotland. It felt more like a kind of a Schmidt versus Scotland era game. And then, like, you look at Scotland in England, and I did genuinely believe that England's pack, England generally speaking, would not be capable of being bullied. I actually thought it inconceivable that a team could properly bully them and dominate them up front to the extent that Scotland did. But what's more remarkable about it is that it was Scotland who did it. Like, Scotland did to England what Ireland have been doing to Scotland for the last 10 years. And they turned it around in the space of a few months, really. Like, in reality, in the space of a few weeks of camp. It shows how quickly these things can turn, and that slides and dips in form are far from terminal. But that being said, like, does that mean that we will no longer be able to bully Scotland to the extent that we have over the last few years? Like, do you think Ireland have the capacity, firstly, to bash them up front anymore?
Probably not to the extent. I mean, there's a nice collection of individuals there. Rory Sutherland's a guy who's going to be in Lions contention. I think in the back row, you think of Watson and even Fagerson in that game against England was unbelievably aggressive and effective and won the gain line. I think your description of kind of hinge is brilliant for this game in a number of circumstances, because I think it's so close that it is just going to hinge on a little moment, potentially a decision from Poit, potentially one defender on the fringe of ruck just slipping in concentration, bounce of a ball potentially. I genuinely think it is that close. The teams are very evenly matched in my mind. They're both, I mean, they're not brilliant top three nations in the world. They're just probably underneath that tier. They're not terrible either. And regardless of what happens and the circumstance of the game, you're right that it is going to be that hinge moment for both of them and how we perceive it. And maybe that's unfair because it could be decided on the bounce of a ball. But if Ireland lose this game, they're staring into that England game, trying to really salvage Six Nations where they could lose 4, which would be really poor given where they've got to in the last decade or longer even. And for Scotland as well, it would just take the momentum out of their revival that they feel they're on. On the flip side, if they beat Ireland, it kind of changes that dynamic. I think part of it has been Ireland expecting and having the confidence to beat Scotland. We've mentioned several times that Ireland aren't confident against the likes of France, the likes of Scotland, of England in recent years. And that's been kind of patent because they keep making errors when they get into tough positions. But against Scotland, even at the end of autumn there, it just looked like they expected to win, and they scored before and after half-time, after Scotland's really good purple patch where they led 9-3 and they moved into control there. I think Ireland will probably be approaching this game with a similar mindset that we're better than these players, and it's a chance for us to kind of put down a marker and kick off this kind of Andy Farrell thing and show everyone what we've been talking about in terms of our progress. But it's supposed to be tough weather conditions this weekend, and that muscular side of the game that you're talking about there is going to be really crucial, both packs of forwards. I don't know how much expansive rugby we'll see, but it's a massive test for the Scottish forwards.
Yeah, just on that, how Wales got back into the game was maul, line out maul. They basically won penalties from further up the field, and that was basically what turned the game before the red card. And if you're Paul O'Connell, and our maul has looked better, and we haven't used it exhaustively, but we've scored from it. Our setup looks good. We've played off a few. So if you're Paul O'Connell and you're trying to identify how to beat Scotland, and the previous regime, you could have, there was kinks everywhere defensively, whereas their defensive line now is good or physical. But I think that could be our entry. That's obviously something that you would see as a coach and go, okay, that's an area that they showed weakness in. And obviously, they'll have worked on it. But, it's a nice couple of clips to show the players in terms of, look, this is going to be our way into the game, particularly if conditions are tough, because obviously it's low risk. And I think that could be their Achilles heel that maybe it'll take that we can go after.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that actually, Bernard, like an entry point for Ireland, or where do we begin in terms of where Ireland actually assert themselves in this game, particularly if there is parity up front. On the flip side of that, like when you look at Scotland's undoubted strengths, how do you combat some of those? Like, we know their attack has been good. I don't want to say consistently, but it has shown signs of real liveliness and at times coherence over the last couple of years under Townsend. How do you stymie that? But also, is there a means of trying to take Stuart Hogg out of the game? Because, like, in every game, it seems he's just an inexorable force. And when you consider really the way that Ireland kicked the ball, the number of times Ireland kicked the ball, he's probably going to see a lot of it. But is there a way even of strategically trying to avoid that? Is it literally a case of trying to kick to space more rather than raining it down on top of the full back? Which I know isn't always the intention, but just happens.
Yeah, I think it's actually just a kicking game that we already have, and that's probably why we've done well against Scotland, is that, if you kick a lot of contestables, that takes Stuart Hogg out of it. I mean, the last thing he wants to be doing is jumping in the air, for a 50-50 ball or a 60-40 ball. He likes to have time, and if he has time from teams that kick long, he can pick off, slower forwards or even backs. He's phenomenally good with his pace and footwork on an outward line and be able to just burn people. So I think that Ireland, and that's why maybe Murray will start, is that, if you want to take away their back three, so Darcy Graham, Duan van der Merwe, Stuart Hogg, all unbelievably dangerous players with ball in hand, but I wouldn't say they're all the best in the air, best in the world in the air. It's not, and I think that's how you stop them. It means their forwards have to work back to play the second face off if they regain it, and it just makes the game tighter. And particularly if the conditions are bad, that would suit us. So like when we say, "Oh, Ireland bully Scotland," I don't think physically the Scots will back off at all. But like what I meant was that we find an area where we can dominate them, and I think that would be the maul. And I think also from a kicking strategy to go contestable rather than kick long. Even if you find grass against them, I still think that they have the ability in that back three to pick you off. So I wouldn't be surprised if we go to contestables a lot more. I don't know what Murray thinks.
The Scots have really worked on their kicking game, to be fair to them, and that's been a kind of hallmark of the last few games, is a real maturity and patience with that. I mean, someone like Finn Russell, he just wants to play. He's kicked, I think, 28 times maybe in the 2 games. And against England, obviously, that was the really clear tactic to just get the ball down there. With Hogg, he's had this lovely variety to his play. I mean, he's only played the 2 games, but he's beaten more defenders than anyone in the championship. 14 in 2 games, 6 line breaks. But also he's kicked the ball from hand 12 times and he's passed 18. We had this in the piece earlier on, so the stats are fresh in my mind. So they're getting better variety and balance to their game, which was always the challenge. I mean, there was a bit of naivety there maybe with Scotland at times where they kind of overplayed their hand. But the kicking game has been really impressive, and it's still an attacking tool. Obviously, Russell is excellent at that. You saw Hogg's try against Wales where he kicks behind off set piece and pressures a mistake from Halfpenny, and obviously the Ali Price, that beautiful little assist for Darcy Graham against the Welsh as well. So a couple of illustrations of it there, and clearly they've been working hard to get better balance to it. So that's also a threat for the Irish defence and backfield, and everyone to be concerned about.
Here's another kind of hinge moment then for you, Bernard. If we are to deploy a kind of a contestable kicking strategy, as would make perfect sense, you outlined it well there. Do you go with James Lowe again? Do you think that Jacob Stockdale can potentially be more disruptive in the air? But equally, and this is provided that Conor Murray starts, which I think he will. But equally, on the other side of the ball, when you consider what Murray said there about Scotland improving their own kicking game, who would you rather sort of going the other way and chasing a ball on Ireland's left wing?
Yeah, look, I'm not convinced that Jacob's brilliant at chasing the contestables either. He got a great one to start the game the other night, and then he lost a few in the air. And look, I don't know if he's done enough, to be honest, to come back in. I think maybe a bench option, but I know I'd stick with Lowe. We need to find out if Lowe is an international. We know Stockdale on form is an international winger. And in my opinion, the jury's still out to a certain extent on James Lowe. And I'd stick with him now against Scotland and find out a bit more about him. And so that's, so it's not purely that I think James Lowe's better than Stockdale. I just think that, we've given him a couple of starts in this block. And it'd be great to know at the end of Six Nations, is he a viable left winger for us? Because Keenan's come in now. Like, don't forget, we were flirting with obviously the idea of Stockdale being a fullback. Keenan's come in and put down a bit of a marker there. So I just think it'd be great to know, is it Stockdale or James Lowe on the wing, and are both of them international quality? Stockdale is, like he is, he obviously he's had some blips, but he is international quality as a finisher. And it'd be great to know, is James Lowe. I mean, Eddie Jones has come out and said, only 70% of his squad are going to the World Cup. And that's kind of has to be, in Farrell's mind as well, a little bit around who is going to go to the World Cup. And the sooner you know that, the better. I just think James Lowe is still, the question mark is still out there, and hopefully he goes and proves it.
Murray, just sticking with selection, and I'm taking it as a given that Conor Murray will start, but may be wrong. Like yourself and Owen Toonan were chatting on the members' pod, I think 2 weeks ago, about the reality that Gibson Park, for example, probably deserves the reward of, or deserves to be rewarded for his form. Like, I thought in Rome, and it comes with the caveat of being Italy, I know it might have been his best game or his most complete game. So do you reward him with a start? And particularly when you consider his box kicking actually has been good as well recently.
Definitely, yeah. He's definitely made it more of a question. And even the continued rise of Craig Casey adds a bit of pressure as well. And it's fantastic that Ireland are in that position. Haven't heard anything on the team at this stage, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Conor Murray back in there, given what we're talking about, the conditions, the pressure. You got a glowing reference from Johnny Sexton yesterday when he said he's back in training and it would be brilliant to have him back. And listen, Conor Murray was playing some pretty good rugby before he picked up that hamstring injury. I know people are, so many people just want him and a lot of the senior players just gone out of the team, but you can't just discount all the good stuff they do, and that just tends to be the case with Conor Murray now. Even some of the good stuff he doesn't attack. Yeah, he probably doesn't have the same high tempo. He certainly doesn't have the same high tempo as others, and it is frustrating at times when that's not there. And I know people just philosophically want that more often, but there's other ways and means to winning games. So it wouldn't surprise me hugely. That aside, though, it'll be a settled team because they feel they got a lot out of that Italy game. The balance of the pack was really good. There was loads of dynamism in the team, a lot of defensive threats as well as punch onto the ball. So even with the weak opposition, they felt they got a lot out of it. And I think we'll see something very similar. Even with someone like Lowe, he's invested this time in him now and probably backed him through a couple of tough games and wants to see the result of that. So it'll be along similar lines.
What about if I could reverse that question to yourself, Bernard, and taking into account what Murray is saying as well about the fact that people are really impatient with Conor Murray? I often think it is actually to do with tempo, in that they just see a ball moving a little bit more slowly, maybe than his opposite nine, or maybe then the options would be able to do from the bench, and just get a little bit fed up with it. But in terms of what Andy Farrell and Mike Catt are actually trying to do with this Ireland team, is that slower tempo a little bit actually at odds with that philosophy, if you like, in that, there probably is an onus on the players to make more quick decisions, be that little bit more expressive, take ownership, and all of the kind of buzz terms we've heard over the last few weeks. But if the ball, despite the fact that we have quick ruck ball, isn't coming out to them that quickly, it surely impinges upon their ability to do that a little bit.
Yeah, but I think Conor can adapt to a certain extent. Obviously, he's probably not the type of high tempo nine that Gibson Park or Craig Casey is, but you don't get to the level he's got to without being able to bring tempo and play, get the ball away from the breakdown quickly and bring other people into it. I just think that he's been pigeonholed to a certain extent by the tactics of the team he's been playing for, i.e. Ireland and Munster. That Munster game is evolving, so is he able to play a role in that? 100% he is. So, yeah, I just think having a real understanding and the nine to a certain extent, if other people aren't in position or are sure of what they're supposed to do next, the nine can look ponderous. And I think Conor's probably been exposed a little bit because of others' uncertainty. Like I said about the tens, when Johnny plays, Ireland look to be more organised. Down to him being so dominant, but you shouldn't need your 10 to have to be as dominant as Johnny to be able to have a fluid attacking game or a fluid kick game, etc. It should come from the systems that are in place from training. So I think if Ireland are going to play high tempo, Conor can certainly play that style. It mightn't be as fast as a Gibson Park or Craig Casey, but it certainly doesn't mean you couldn't pick him. It just needs to be clear. And if the weather conditions are as they are forecast to be, and Ireland are going to go down that, direct forward dominance, mauling, box kicking game, well then he's the right selection for that game plan. And again, this was the argument we had a little bit about the French game where we picked Gibson Park and Willie Burns, two halfbacks who aren't specialists in the kicking game, and we imposed a kicking strategy, So if we're gonna go and try and outrun Scotland and play high tempo, well, then I would be saying pick Gibson Park. But I think that if you look at Scotland and you want to beat them, which Ireland will, it won't be free flowing. I think that would play into Scotland's hands. So I think that's why Murray should play. But I also think that if Ireland, if the game opens up and we want to play with tempo, and we're sure how we want to play an attack, that he's well capable of of service in that. There's no doubt. But he has been pigeonholed as this slow 9 who just wants to put his foot on it and box kick. But I think that's been mainly down to the tactics of the teams he's been playing for.
Just finally, just to add on that, Gav, like defending is a massive part of the game. It's not just about scoring tries, and he's probably the best defensive line in the world still, in my eyes. And he adds a huge amount in that sense. He's really strong in the tackle. He's a really good organizer. He's got a good reading of the game. And that's half of it. And that has to be part of the decision making, not just your attack, which we all obviously get excited about. If Gibson Park starts this weekend, I think it's great that Ireland can have some assurance there. As you say, in the last couple of games, he's done well. And I don't think there'll be much fear of it now. And Stuart Lancaster was really interesting speaking about how he's growing into the mindset of being a starter and probably starting to realise his capabilities in that sense, which is really positive to hear. So there's options there, and there's slightly different approaches. But just with Murray, I agree with Bernard. You can't completely discount what he does in attack as well. Even if you think last year, no one had more assists. And obviously the 9 always has assists, but often, I think there was 6 of them last year. Often it's really good decision-making from Conor Murray that allows someone to finish off, say, a passage or make an initial line break. He's got a great whip on his pass when he's at his best as well. So it's a good position to be in. That there's a bit of a debate now, though.
Can I come back in on that? No. Just the thing is really interesting, Murray, in that like Gibson Park has been probably exposed a little bit on the wing defensively, and that's how Ireland seem to defend with him a lot. Now I know he's sometimes in the backfield, but he tries to get back to that left blind wing as much as possible. Conor is generally more comfortable in the backfield. Now maybe that's a high thing with contestables, but it'd just be interesting to see if from I think if Gibson Park plays, Scotland will definitely try and get back to his wing, and because there has been defensive issues there. We got exposed once or twice against Italy, but didn't really hurt us. But if I spoke about Ireland saying, we can go after the Scotland maul. If you're Scotland, you're saying, look, we can go after Gibson Park, after 2 phases when he's back on the wing, and that may be a deciding factor. Or maybe if Conor plays, they're so comfortable with Conor in the backfield that he stays in the backfield, and then you get a wing back on that edge, which is obviously a different and a nicer edge to it. So, yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see who plays, and then obviously how we try and protect our 9s defensively.
That's going to be my next question, actually. We've identified Ireland's potential entry point into the game as the maul. You've spoken of another there on Scotland's side of things. Bernard, are there other ways into this game for Scotland, Murray, or where would you see them targeting Ireland's weaknesses? Yeah,
I think they'll try to use their defence, as Bernard mentioned, which has become more aggressive under Steve Tandy, as a bit of a weapon. And if we think where Ireland are from that France game, it was a lot of discussion around their attack, around poor decision making, and they put their hands up in that regard and probably put a bit of onus on the players. So I think that'll be a massive focus for them, is pressuring those errors from Ireland, pressuring that indecision, and probably trying to get back at that lack of confidence where probably Ireland have been in tough positions. So that'll be a fascinating one for me, because it is different to what Ireland, or Scotland rather, have been in the past, where you always felt there were opportunities to be had against their defence. It definitely looks stronger now. It definitely looks more organised, with a better mindset. Simple changes, but it has made a difference. So I'd expect them to put real pressure on Ireland's decision making.
Any other areas for you that Scotland can worm their way into this game, Bernard, before we chat about England-France?
I think if we allow Scotland, well, obviously the question mark is around our set piece D. How tight that is, and Stuart Townsend would certainly, I think, like to have a crack off that with a couple of power plays. And the other thing that's questionable about us is how good we are on the edge defensively. So, I think there's definitely little bits that Scotland will have looked at in our first 3 games and went, there's opportunities there. I think our defence is still a work in progress. I know, there was some good line speed, some good aggression against Italy, but we have to be able to defend. We have to be able to judge our defence, I think, after Scotland and England. So I don't think it's by any manner of means locked in as and even that try that Italy scored, I mean, it's pretty basic stuff, and And yeah, we have to be able to defend consistently for 80 minutes against better teams to be able to say that's not an area of concern.
I actually can't wait for this game. I'll get your predictions at the end of the show. We'll just chat about England, France to begin with. Bernard, I'll stick with yourself, and going back to what you were talking about with Fabien Galthié about 2 or 3 episodes ago, and his attention to detail and his almost sort of sociopathic management approach, in that he's probably not necessarily a people's person, or he's definitely a Fabian's person, but maybe not so much for everybody else. We've probably seen that play out now to an extent in how this COVID thing and postponement of the Scotland game has transpired. There are definitely murmurs of discontent coming from France, and even when you consider how the news broke that Galthié had gone to his son's match, it was so clearly leaked from within that setup. And you were making the point on RT's podcast quite rightly that originally it had been pinned on a fitness trainer, and clearly somebody within the setup felt aggrieved at that he was framed, if you like, as being patient zero. Suddenly there's reports in L'Équipe and elsewhere that it was in fact Galthié, which again hasn't been confirmed that he was patient zero, but that's how it emerged that he had broken the bubble. It would seem as though all is not well. And even when you were talking about Galthié a few weeks ago, back in my mind I was thinking, God, it's a long enough road to a World Cup. As much as they have secured this unbelievable coaching team and a brilliant head coach, technical head coach, it is a long journey to get to a World Cup with that type of managerial style. And we saw, I'm not saying Joe Schmidt is a sociopath, but there were probably elements of burnout, psychological burnout on behalf of the Ireland players towards the end of his tenure as well at that World Cup. We know that sometimes these things have shelf lives. So how sort of precarious a position do you think France are in at the moment with Galthié, or do you think this is the kind of thing that with the result, and particularly a result in England, it can be kind of swept under the carpet? The players are able to sort of compartmentalise it as well, in that they're getting to the end of the tournament, they'll be home pretty soon, and potentially with a championship in their under their belt, if you like, or under their whatever, in their luggage.
Yeah, I think it's really important that they do get, maybe not necessarily a result this week, but another strong performance where they feel they're on the right track. I think, what's been really noticeable about this team, apart from the fact they've obviously found some talent and stuck with that talent, the selection's been a lot more consistent than under previous coaches, but is the way the team have played for each other and the squad mentality and which wasn't there before. They seem to look after each other, and I think that was probably a strength in that. Maybe the fact that they did, I suppose, pull Fabien up about the fact that he was to blame could actually help galvanise the squad. It could be a good thing for them, but certainly for him, I think he has good people around him who are more personable than he is, particularly Ibanez, Lauren Labitte. Sean is tough, but he's very fair, and I think it's very clear that Bernard Laporte wants Fabien to work and last. But if it implodes, it'd be so French that they've actually ruined what was a really positive dynamic through just some indiscipline. But look at I want to see French rugby strong, and I like this team. I think it could be it could be a team that is right up the top end of world rugby for the next 4 or 5 years, maybe longer if they stick together. So I'd like to hope that it's forgotten about. Well, obviously they put tougher protocols in place, etc., but it doesn't jeopardize what looks like an exciting era for French rugby. But if they were to go out this weekend and get smashed, and it looks like the players aren't playing for the jersey anymore or whatever, who knows what could happen. I mean, look at Bernard Laporte will want to back Fabien Galthié, but most importantly, he'll want France to win the World Cup. And if he feels that there's an issue or blocker there, he'd have to deal with it. But it's so interesting. Then you have the Eddie Jones. Has he lost the dressing room? What's going on? Slavishly kind of sticking by his tried and trusted, which I have no issue with. But just there's so many different talking points for this game as there was for Ireland and Scotland.
Murray, do you think it is precariously balanced for France? Am I being a little bit dramatic in that? Like, and I really just mean to echo Bernard's point there about the fact that if they were to take a heavyish defeat, maybe the wheels could come off. You just don't know with France. I know it sounds a bit cliche, but it also sometimes cliches they exist for a reason.
Yeah, I just see. I look at the talent. Look at the squad, and I just see unbelievable talent. And it was interesting. I was listening to Birch on a podcast recently. He was saying that very often we kind of just overlook the sheer quality in the squad, and at the moment they have that. They have the best players, don't they? They have incredible athletes. Even this weekend, you look at Vakatawa coming back into the team, an unbelievable player. Entimek back onto the bench. They could change and mix and match, and you saw it in autumn when they were missing their full first team, and they nearly beat England. They've got this frightening level of talent, and they've got stuff in order back in France, and academies and production lines and non-French player qualification rules, etc., are in much better nick. So I think they're here to stay, and I think that's really positive. But in terms of the here and now, it is a fascinating dynamic, and that Jones is stuck with most of the team. Max Maylands comes in a fullback, a guy who's probably a little bit more expressive and can go off script. I think it's really exciting to see him thrown into a fixture of this nature. But just two changes up front with Cowan, Dickey and Ewells coming in. The rest of the Saracens guys get another chance to build a bit more of that fitness and sharpness that they've clearly been missing. And Jones will feel they're in a brilliant position to finish strongly now by making a statement win and then going over to Dublin and sowing a few more seeds of misery into the Ireland squad. So, yeah, they're both in kind of different positions coming into this. France are still on course. Like, you know, they've obviously had that game postponed, but if they can refocus with those additions coming back, they're in a great place to go and win the championship. Albeit Wales will have something to say about that. They're on for win number 4 in their Grand Slam march against Italy, kind of quietly in the background.
What you say about Jones is interesting, Murray. You touch upon it as well, Bernard, and I'll stick with yourself on this one, but exactly the type of scenario that Ireland are seeking to avoid in beating Scotland, avoiding going into that game in Dublin against England, like trying to salvage the wreckage really of a season and just avoid 4 defeats. An England defeat here, which if France can sort of stick together, remain united and so on, is actually probably likely, and they're in the exact same boat coming to Dublin. They're avoiding a really embarrassing tournament. So do you think there actually is evidence, if you like, of the Jones thing reaching its natural conclusion, or is this just another occasion on which they're sort of playing possum as they have done a couple of times over the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, look, I think he was badly affected round 1 by the form of the Saracens players, but they're players who are world class, who have done it for club and country, and their age profile would suggest that there's lots more good rugby in them. So I can totally understand why he picked them round 1, because I'm sure it wasn't obvious that how match shy they were. Let's be honest, they had an edge in terms of their kicking game, and Scotland came, and often you see that round 1 where that's your best chance to kind of develop a game plan uniquely for that opposition and prep it, because you have 2 weeks prep to go into it. There's a focus on England. There was a lot of emotion around it. There was no home crowd, etc., etc. So Scotland went and exposed some weaknesses. The Welsh game, you know, there's obviously 14 points that probably shouldn't have been awarded, and England seemed to panic and they lost their discipline completely, and that can sometimes happen to even the most experienced teams when they just feel that they're being ridden up and down the field, and you overplay then, and there was some harsh calls as well for other penalties, particularly against Itoje, a few very marginal ones. So, and that game went out of control. Actually, within that game, I thought they played some of their best attack that we've seen for the last year and a half, and it's actually probably forced Eddie Jones into evolving and trying to find the next trend or the next way ahead. And they did that with that 30 seconds of power. If we haven't gone forward, kick well. And other teams seem to have copped on to that and found ways of counteracting that. So I think now they will go full steam ahead in terms of this evolution, which the bits we saw against Wales was really exciting, and I thought Slade was phenomenal. I think Slade could have played himself onto a Lions tour. He was so effective, and if they go and add to that again this week, and again against Ireland, next year they could be back as the champions, because they have unbelievable talent like France have. So I don't think it's the end of Eddie Jones. I think the players believe in him. He's been loyal to this group, and they'll see a need to repay that. And the more minutes like of Mako and Billy get into their legs, Owen Farrell, I mean, they're only going to be stronger now. This is effectively be like having had a pre-season with 2 or 3 friendlies, and then you're ready to go in round 2, and they'll hit their straps now in round 4 and 5. So and I think it's actually England playing with more variety could be an even more daunting opposition than what we were used to.
Give me your prediction in that one, Birch. England, France, and then I'll come back around for Scotland, Ireland.
Yeah, I think England by 5.
Murray, England or France?
I'll just do my 3 now to save you asking me again. I'll go England and Ireland and Wales to win this weekend.
How do Ireland win it, Murray? By how many, roughly?
Like real narrow.
Right.
I really do think it's going to come down to hopefully a late bit of drama. And that could go either way, but I think Ireland just to get over the line, 2 or 3 points.
Scotland or Ireland for yourself, Birch?
Yeah, I'm going Ireland by a penalty, 3 points, and obviously Wales to win bonus.
Smashing. Love to finish a pod on a high note, as always. Well, not as always, but as has been the case recently, at least. I'm going to keep my prediction to myself this week. Thank you to everybody at home for tuning in, and for all of the 42 members for your questions in the Members Rugby WhatsApp group, members.the42.ie. If you want to sign up there, support our independent sports journalism, get kind of more access to the pod and steer its coverage and so on. We really appreciate everybody on that side of things. This podcast was brought to you in association with William Hill. Remember to gamble responsibly and visit dunlewy.net for more information on that. Enjoy the rugby over the weekend, and we will be back post-match over the weekend for the 42 members, Monday morning as well, with Murray, Kinsella and Owen Toolan, and then next Thursday in this regular slot for non-members and members alike. Until then, mind yourselves, take it easy.